Hey guys, I'm Nashwa. Welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new here. A lot of new people have joined since I posted my collaboration video with Risha. So I leave a card link for that video if you haven't checked it out. But if you're new here, welcome. And in this video, I'll talk about all the books that I read in July, which were mostly Jane Austen books and a couple of other books that I finished in the first week of August. So let's get into it. The first book that I'll talk about is called The Killing in the Consulate by Jonathan Rugman. And this book basically covers the investigation and the murder of the Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who walked into the Saudi consulate in Turkey in broad daylight in 2018, and he was never seen again. And the alarm was initially reported by his fiancée, who was waiting outside, and he basically went in to collect some paperwork to prove that he was single so that he could get married to his fiancée. So it was a very tragic start to that story, but this book goes into so much more detail and it's so comprehensive. It basically starts with the history of Jamal Khashoggi, who he was as a journalist, who his political affiliations or allegiances were, who he was aligned with. It then talks about the history of the Saudi royal family, how the crown prince came to power, and how all of the system of the crown prince and the Saudi royal family basically works. I thought that was fascinating. It then goes into the rivalry between the Saudi royal family and the journalist, as he was writing from different countries and he was basically writing to criticize the Saudi royal family. So this book not only looks into the murder, which is covered in a lot of detail. There are transcripts and details that were never revealed before. They're in there. They're very daunting, especially if you look at the things that were happening inside the consulate. But I think this book is not just about that. This is so much more because it talks about the regional politics. And I think we are all too familiar with the grisly details, but we don't know how it affected the regional politics. So it tells us the planning of the murder, and it also talks about the aftermath, how different countries reacted to it. For example, the stance that Turkey took and how the US government under the administration of Trump reacted to it, because the US administration and Saudi Arabia were basically having an arms deal. So it talks about that element. And I feel like Middle Eastern politics is quite complicated as it is, but this enhanced a little bit of my understanding as to where Saudi Arabia's political rivalries and alliances are. It talks about the conflict in Yemen, it talks about the conflict in Qatar, it talks about the conflict and the rivalry that Saudi Arabia has with Iran, and Saudi Arabia's alliances with the UAE and other countries in the region. So I think this is not only a look into the murder, but this is definitely more political, and it's something that I really enjoyed. I highlighted and marked almost every page. I don't know if you can see that, but it was because there was so much new and interesting information in there that I did not before. So it definitely enhanced my understanding of politics, and almost in a thriller-like fashion, it kept me hooked to the story. So I gave this book 5 stars, and I think it is definitely one of my top non-fiction books of 2020. The next book that I'll talk about is called Memento, Mori by Muriel, and this is a book that I randomly picked up from an old bookshop, and it literally started falling apart in my hands as I was reading it because the spine came off and the pages all started falling apart. So I had to glue it back in. But this is basically a dark comedy. So it's basically a book about a bunch of old people who are all getting phone calls, and someone on the other end of the line is telling them that, remember, you will die. And it's basically throwing all these old people into panic, and they're going to the police, and the police doesn't really believe what's going on, as in doesn't really believe that this is happening. And it started happening to multiple people. I initially thought that this would be a mystery as to who the caller is, but soon after that we realized that this is basically not even about the caller. Like in a sense it is, but it's more about the old people in the book and how they're reacting. It also looks at old age. So parts of it are very sad and very poignant, and parts of it are just like laugh out loud funny because the way that the people talk. So this is a dark comedy, and I love dark comedies, and this is a book that I really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm very much looking forward to picking another book by Muriel. Now moving on to the Jane Austen books, I think I'll start with Sanditon, which is Jane Austen's unfinished novel. I'll keep it on this side, it's easier for me to hold. And I really enjoyed it, even though the story is left incomplete because of her untimely death. But it basically has all the characteristics of a Jane Austen story. We have a young, outgoing girl, we have these people who are ridiculous, and it's basically about this one family who has inhabited the town of Sanditon, and Sanditon is a lazy fishing town, and this gentleman is trying to make it into like a very touristic place where people visit, and he's always trying to get people to come there. And then we have a very mean old lady in it, like all Jane Austen books. I feel like there's someone mean in there, and I really enjoyed her character. So it was very short, it was less than 80 pages, but I still gave it like 3.5 stars because I enjoyed it, and I wish it was complete during her lifetime. That wish will never be granted, but I've heard there's a TV show which I will probably check out at some point. The next one I want to talk about is called Northanger Abbey, and this is also one of the shorter ones, and I really wish I had like matching editions for this and Pride and Prejudice, but unfortunately they weren't available. And this is a story of Catherine Morland, who gets invited to go to the city of Bath, and from there she gets invited to go to Northanger Abbey with the family who has a young son. Like all Jane Austen books, there is a hero and a heroine, and essentially this is a mockery of Gothic novels. And I found it really funny because I love Gothic novels, but I'm also open to the idea of someone making fun of Gothic novels. So once she reaches Northanger Abbey, she basically thinks that she's trapped in a Gothic novel, and there's things happening that really aren't happening, but she thinks they're happening, and she's seeing all these things. So I thought it was really funny. And the thing that I liked about this was that it read very, very differently from Pride and Prejudice and Emma and the more evolved or the more matured works. This was completely different in tone, and I really liked the fact that Austen was the snarky narrator who was guiding us along. So I gave this 4 stars, and I really ended up liking it. The next one I'm going to talk about is called Emma, and Emma is basically about Emma Woodhouse, a very rich girl, and Mr. Knightley, her love interest, who is 16 years older than her. I feel like I'm not really going into the synopses of these books because everybody knows what Jane Austen stories are about, but this one was a bit of a hit and a miss for me because there were parts of it that I really liked, and there were some parts that I did not like at all. So as a character, I really liked Emma. I understood her personality and why she was the way that she was. But Mr. Knightley was the person that I kind of didn't really understand. I was a little bit annoyed with him because he was very bossy, and he was very condescending to Emma in a lot of ways, and to me he came across as a bit of a jerk and a very jealous character, and that is something that I didn't really like in him, but that was kind of transcended by how kind he was, and he did some things towards the end which kind of redeemed him. But as a story, I think it went on for a long time. Like it's a little over it's 464 pages, so that's a very long book. In some parts I felt it was dragging a little, and I didn't really like the characters of what's her name, Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill. Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill were 2 characters that I honestly didn't really care about. I didn't really care about the story. Emma was someone who I was interested in, and Mr. Knightley was okay, but I will say that I did enjoy the BBC miniseries. It was a condensed form of the book. They weeded out all the irrelevant details, and we were basically given 4 really crisp and entertaining episodes. So I gave this book 3.5 stars because to me it doesn't count as a 4-star book. It went on for way too long. There were a lot of things that I didn't enjoy, but it's still a good book. And the last one I'm going to talk about is Pride and Prejudice, and who hasn't heard of Pride and Prejudice? So in my mind, I think this was the first time that I read this book because I have a vague memory of reading an abridged version at some point, but I don't know if that memory is a false memory, if it's something that I fabricated, or if I actually did read a abridged version at some point. But this is a story that's not new. Like it's been done so many times, but I wanted to check out the book. And I'm so glad I did because I absolutely loved it. Like it was entertaining, it was a family drama. I loved the characters of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. I thought Mr. Bennet was this brilliant man with the dry sense of humor who always said the right thing at the right time. How can I possibly talk about Pride and Prejudice without addressing Mr. Darcy? And I feel like a lot of people who read this book relate to Lizzie Bennet because she's outgoing, she's obstinate and headstrong like it said in the book, but I'm Mr. Darcy, and I'll tell you why. I'm Mr. Darcy because when I used to work in an office, I've been working from home for the last couple of years, but when I used to work in an office, sometimes I would have conflicts with people, and instead of addressing those conflicts in a way which would allow me to talk to them, and often it would go really sour, so I wouldn't really like to engage in a conversation, I would write down all my complaints and my grievances in an email and then send it out to them. And then when I read the part that Lizzie Bennet says no to Darcy and Darcy goes home and he writes a really long letter to address his grievances and his concerns, I just found it really funny and really amusing, and I realized that As inept and socially awkward he is, I am just that person, but he comes through, he redeems himself, he's a very good person. And if there's ever an argument of Mr. Knightley versus Mr. Darcy, for me it will always be Mr. Darcy. My mom really liked the book. I gave her a translation of it because she doesn't like reading books in Urdu, and she really enjoyed it. So now we're going to watch the BBC show together again. So I already have 2 reading vlogs for my Jane Austen July readathon. That was the first time that I vlogged. I thought it would be fun, and it sort of kept me motivated. So I'll leave those in the end cards in case you're interested. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.